Good evening. Over the course of the last couple of weeks, we've been looking at the Gospel according to Luke and what it teaches us about the role of the Spirit. The first week, we spent considerable time looking at the way in which the Spirit was active in and around the birth of Jesus. And we noted how many different people were referred to as being filled with the Spirit. They would be filled with the Spirit and they would prophesy. The Spirit was active in the conception of Jesus. The angel told Elizabeth that her son, John, would be filled with the Holy Spirit from his birth. When she met Mary, who was also pregnant, the baby leaped in her womb, and we are told that Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. Then last week we looked at the passage where John, the one who was full of the Spirit from his mother's womb, came preaching a conversion baptism. He was preparing the way for the mightier one of whom he said he was not worthy to unloose the latch of his sandals. And that mightier one would come and he would baptize people with the Holy Spirit. Oddly, that passage in chapter 3 ends with a reference to Herod and John's conflict with him over Herod's wife. And we are told that Herod put him in prison. What's interesting is that we are told all of this before Jesus comes to John to be baptized. That's the passage we'll look at tonight. Luke chapter 3, verses 21 through 23. This passage picks up with the fact that all the people were being baptized. And we are told that when all of the people were going out for baptism, Jesus was baptized too. It's significant that Jesus comes for this baptism because Jesus was one who knew no sin. He was one who had been conceived by means of the Spirit. He was one who knew what it was like to be about the things of his Father. And the spectacular words which the angel spoke to his mother Mary about his role in salvation all build to this moment when Jesus shows up and is also baptized. Significantly in Luke, we are not told that John baptizes Jesus, though that's what we know from other gospel accounts. Rather, the focus seems to be upon Jesus' identification with humankind. He shows up standing among sinners. He shows up connected to sinners, sinners for whom he will die, sinners who will be able to be baptized in the Spirit after their conversion. He shows up being baptized. And it's during this event, it's an event for Jesus that signifies his conformity to what John calls for, his identification, his identification with John's ministry. The mightier one is following the one who prepared the way. And Jesus identifies with John and at the same time is identifying with sinful humanity. For Jesus, it was an act of worship as well. For the text tells us that he was praying at the time of his baptism. We find that Jesus himself was a man of prayer. And while he's praying when he was baptized, we are told three things happened. The heavens were torn apart. There's a text in Isaiah in which the prophet says to God, "Oh, that you would rend the heavens, and come down to us and be with us. In some ways, we can see that this event at Jesus' baptism fulfills that text. In another way, we get the distinct impression and implication that the heavens are always open for Jesus. The heavens tear apart. We are then told that the Spirit comes down. And in the Greek text, the passage reads very literally, and the Holy Spirit, as in bodily form, comes down as a dove. He saw the Holy Spirit in bodily form come down as a dove and remain upon him. This event was important for Jesus. We know that just as he has been about the business of his Father, the things of his Father, so he has continued to grow in his own understanding of his role and his identity. And so when the heavens tear apart, they are open for him. They are open so that he can fulfill his mandate. And when the Spirit comes down upon him, we see other things going on in this text. You might ask or think, why does the Spirit come down upon him if he is conceived by the Spirit? What's going on in his life when the Spirit comes down upon him? It reveals a bit of the mystery of how God acts, how the Spirit interacts with Jesus, the Son of God, as he's identified in Luke's Gospel. You wouldn't think perhaps that he needed the Spirit, and yet this Spirit conceived Jesus was anointed by the Spirit. And the way in which this is described is very concrete. He saw the Spirit in bodily form coming down as a dove and remaining upon him. This kind of concrete language underscores the fact that Jesus has been anointed by the Spirit, and that the Spirit is not present here and there in his life, but that the Spirit is concretely abiding with him. It only makes sense that the one who will baptize with the Holy Spirit is the one that the Spirit comes down bodily as a dove and remains upon him. We've seen a lot of activity of the Spirit to this point. And now we see Jesus being prepared for his messianic mission and for his role as Spirit baptizer. So that's the second thing that transpires at the baptism. The third thing that transpires is a voice comes from heaven. This voice from heaven appears to be unmistakable. And in some ways, God in his fullness, Father, Son, and Spirit, are all present in this moment. Because the words from heaven do not say, "This is my Son," as a testimony, but says, "You are my Son, the beloved." It indicates that how Jesus has been active since his birth has been pleasing to God. That Jesus turning up for John's baptism, this sinner's baptism, has been pleasing to his Father. That Jesus' activity to this point has been obedience and has been pleasing to him. You are my son. These words have to mean a lot to Jesus as he continues to make his way. We sometimes wonder why he would need such words of reassurance from the Father, since he is the Son of God. But we need to never forget that not only was Jesus fully God, but Jesus was fully human. He's not like the old Superman, Clark Kent, who's always Superman, but just in disguise. Jesus enters in to the human predicament, though without sin. Jesus identifies with us. And so when the Father speaks, "You are my son," these words have to be powerful to Jesus. And the fact that God is pleased with him also would be striking an extraordinary chord with Jesus. Sometimes we ask ourselves, is the Lord pleased with our lives? And sometimes we are discouraged by what we think his answer might be. But to hear from God these words. Wesleyan Pentecostals believe in the assurance of our salvation, that we can know that we know, that the Spirit bears witness with our own spirit. Now, the final part of this that I want us to look at briefly tells us a couple of more things about Jesus in verses 23 through 37. We're told Jesus' age. Again, a concrete reference. He was 30 years of age when he began his ministry. And then, oddly, it seems, Luke gives us Jesus' genealogy. And if you read this genealogy, you'll notice that it begins with Jesus. And it says that he was the son, so it was thought, of Joseph. We know why that caveat's included, because we know that Jesus was uniquely conceived by the Spirit, that the power of the Most High overshadowed Mary. So as we begin backtracking Jesus' genealogy, we go through a number of names with which we are familiar. But what I want to call attention to is how this is completed down at the end of verse 37, where we are told that he is the son of Adam, the Son of God. Jesus comes to stand with sinners, to stand with humanity. Those are the people that he comes to redeem and empower by his Spirit. He is fully human. And notice that Luke, unlike Matthew, traces Jesus' genealogy all the way back to Adam, and the way in which Jesus is identified with the entire human family. And Jesus, as we know, is the Son of God. Well, that's where we'll leave it tonight, but that prepares us for chapter 4, verse 1, when Jesus goes into the wilderness to be tempted. Notice he is described as being full of the Holy Spirit. Thanks for being with us. God bless you.